She wasn't angry. She wasn't sorry. She laughed. When the officer found her calmly sipping orange juice with her parents' bodies upstairs, she smiled and said, "They shouldn't have touched my phone." From the outside, she looked like the perfect daughter, honor student, soft voice, always polite. But when the courtroom lights dimmed and the jury saw what she'd done at 11:47 p.m., everything changed. Search history, texts, footage. The judge had no choice. She became the youngest person executed in the state's history. But what chilled everyone more than the murder was the way she looked at the camera afterward and whispered, "I'm finally free." Before we show you what really happened that night, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who thinks screen time is just a harmless rule. Because sometimes, taking away a phone costs everything. The security footage showed everything in horrifying clarity. At 11:47 p.m. on April 16th in suburban Denton, Texas, 17-year-old Hannah Cole walked down the hallway of her family's single-story brick home, carrying her father's old aluminum baseball bat. The home security system her father had installed just 6 months earlier captured audio and video of what happened next. Footage so disturbing that when it was played at trial, 3 jurors would require medical attention, and Judge Patricia Hargrave would order a 10-minute recess so the courtroom could compose itself. The courtroom that day was packed beyond capacity. Every seat behind the rail was filled with reporters shifting in their chairs, family members clutching tissues, and spectators who had lined up outside since dawn hoping to get in. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Even the bailiff, a former Marine named Derek Ramos with a permanent scowl and 20 years on the job, seemed reluctant to breathe too loudly. At the center of it all sat Hannah Cole, 17 years old, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, dressed in navy blue, the kind of conservative color her mother might have picked for school picture day. She didn't look at anyone, not the prosecutors, not the packed gallery, not the cameras positioned at the back of the room, just straight ahead, face blank, hands folded on the table in front of her. Judge Hargrave, mid-60s with silver hair and a face carved by years of grim decisions, looked down from the bench. Her voice was measured, controlled. "State, you may proceed." Prosecutor Alina Brandt, a tall woman in her early 40s with sharp features and sharper instincts, stood and approached the laptop connected to the courtroom's projection system. She didn't speak. She simply tapped a key, and then the screen lit up. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47:03 p.m. For the first few seconds, nothing moved, just a dimly lit hallway, a single overhead bulb flickering slightly, and the low hum of an air conditioning unit somewhere in the house. The ambient noise of a quiet Tuesday night. Then Hannah appeared in the frame. The collective intake of breath was immediate. Several people in the gallery leaned forward. A woman in the third row covered her mouth with her hand. Hannah moved slowly through the hallway, the bat hanging loosely at her side. She wasn't rushing, wasn't hesitating, just walking with purpose, her bare feet making no sound on the hardwood floor. She passed directly under the camera without looking up, her expression completely neutral, almost serene. The hallway stretched toward a closed door at the end. Her parents' bedroom. She stopped just outside it. The bat shifted slightly in her grip. No words, no sound from her. Just the quiet creak of floorboards as she adjusted her weight. Then she reached forward and knocked. Light, almost polite. Like she was checking if they were awake. 3 seconds of silence. The door handle turned. The door opened just a crack. What came next would haunt everyone in that courtroom for the rest of their lives. Screaming, not Hannah's, her mother's. High-pitched, shocked, rapidly escalating from confusion to pure terror. Then her father's voice, deep and panicked, saying words that were impossible to make out over the chaos. A crash as something heavy hit furniture. The unmistakable sound of wood connecting with flesh and bone, a dull, wet thud that repeated again and again. One juror, a woman in her 50s named Margaret Keene, made a small, whimpering sound. Another juror, a man in his 30s, went completely pale and gripped the armrests of his chair. The sounds continued, more impacts. A scream that cut off abruptly, something falling. The rhythmic thuds continuing, faster now, more desperate. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but was actually 4 minutes and 37 seconds according to the timestamp, silence. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then a sound that made several people in the gallery physically recoil. A quiet giggle, breathy, almost playful. "Stop the video," Judge Hargrave said sharply, her voice cutting through the horror. Prosecutor Brandt reached for the laptop, but the footage continued for 1 more second, just enough to show Hannah stepping back into the hallway. The bat now dark and dripping, her expression unchanged. Still calm, still serene. Then the screen went black. A woman in the back of the courtroom began sobbing openly. A man near the front clutched his chest, breathing heavily. One of the jurors, a younger woman named Sarah Chen, stood suddenly, staggered sideways, and collapsed against the wall. Bailiff Ramos rushed over to steady her, while another court officer called for medical assistance. Judge Hargrave stood immediately. Her voice was tight, controlled, but you could hear the strain underneath. "This court is in recess. 10 minutes. Everyone clear the courtroom except essential personnel." The room emptied slowly, not with the usual chatter and shuffling, but with a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. Hannah Cole remained at the defense table, hands still folded, staring at nothing. Her attorney, Marcus Ellis, a public defender in his late 50s with gray hair and tired eyes, sat beside her with his head in his hands. When the bailiff approached to escort Hannah out during the recess, she stood without being asked and walked calmly toward the holding area. As she passed the prosecutor's table, Brandt would later testify that Hannah glanced at her and smiled slightly, just a flicker. Then it was gone. To anyone who had known Hannah Cole before April 16th, what happened seemed impossible. Teachers at Caddo Ridge High School described her as bright, diligent, perhaps a bit isolated but never troubled. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Owens, testified that Hannah had a 4.0 GPA and had already been accepted to 3 colleges, including one with a full academic scholarship. Neighbors on Meadowbrook Lane called her polite, quiet, the kind of teenager who said thank you and helped carry groceries without being asked. "She was just a good kid," one neighbor told investigators. "Quiet, kept to herself mostly, but always respectful. You'd never think—" She didn't finish the sentence. Hannah lived in a modest single-story home with trimmed hedges and a pale blue mailbox in a cul-de-sac where everyone seemed to know everyone, and people still left their garage doors open in the summer. Her mother, Denise Cole, 44 years old, worked as a nurse at Denton Regional Medical Center, often pulling long shifts, sometimes overnight. Her father, Mark Cole, 46, was a software engineer who worked from home. His office converted from what had once been a formal dining room. They were by all accounts good parents. Maybe a little strict, but not unusually so. No history of abuse, no police reports, no calls to Child Protective Services, just a family trying their best with normal rules, normal boundaries, normal parenting. Denise and Mark believed in structure. No dating until 18. No unsupervised parties. Homework before screen time. Phones put away by 10 p.m. on school nights. Curfews enforced. Grades monitored. The kind of rules that most parents would recognize as reasonable, maybe even lenient, by some standards. They thought they were being good parents. Responsible parents. They had no idea that to Hannah, every rule was a provocation, every boundary a declaration of war. The tension had been building for over a year, though no one recognized it at the time. As Hannah's classmates lived increasingly online, their lives documented on Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram, Hannah watched her own freedoms contract. When her mother caught her texting past curfew, the phone disappeared for 3 days. When her father discovered she'd created a second Instagram account under a fake name to get around their monitoring, he deleted it and reset all her passwords. They thought they were protecting her from online predators, from cyberbullying, from the dangers they read about in news articles. Hannah thought they were controlling her. Denise would later tell her sister in a phone call 2 days before she died, "She took the punishment too well. She didn't even argue. I don't know if that's maturity or something else, but it doesn't feel right." Hannah didn't rebel in the traditional sense. No drugs, no sneaking out at first, no dramatic confrontations. But her journal, later recovered from her bedroom desk drawer during the investigation, told a different story. The entries weren't typical teenage angst about crushes or friend drama or feeling misunderstood. They were questions, cold, calculated questions. Why do I let them decide everything about my life? One entry read. Why do I feel like I'm not real unless someone's watching? Another entry, dated February 14th, said simply, what would happen if I just removed them from the equation? One of her former classmates, a girl named Julia Mason, testified at trial about Hannah's behavior during senior year. Julia sat uncomfortably in the witness box, fidgeting with her hands. She got weird, Julia said. Like she was always kind of intense, you know. But senior year, it was different. She'd say things that didn't quite make sense. Things like, people should pay for what they do to you. Or, I wish I could just control everything. We thought she was joking. Or venting, you know. Everybody complains about their parents. But there was something about the way she said it that was just off. The prosecutor asked Julia to elaborate. It was like she meant it, Julia said. Like she'd really thought about it. Not just complaining, planning. Hannah's English teacher, Mr. David Morton, a man in his late 40s who'd been teaching for 20 years, testified about an essay Hannah had written in November, 5 months before the murders. The assignment was to write about a moral dilemma. Hannah wrote about whether parents had the right to control their children's entire lives. She argued that parental authority was a form of ownership, Morton said, reading from the essay he'd kept. She wrote, punishment should make people understand their place. If you don't enforce consequences, people never learn. Sometimes the only way to break free from control is to eliminate the source of that control. I thought it was metaphorical. About society, about systems of power. I gave her an A. I should have. He stopped, couldn't continue. Hannah had been fascinated by control, by power dynamics, by the mechanics of punishment and consequence. Late at night, after her parents went to bed, she would retrieve her phone from where she'd hidden it under a loose floorboard in her closet. She'd scroll through psychology forums, true crime case studies, court records. She read about famous trials, about evidence collection, about how people got caught and how they got away with it. Not as cautionary tales, as a curriculum, as instructions. The problems escalated in March when Hannah began skipping school. Once in January, twice in February, 3 times in the first week of March. The school sent automated emails that her parents initially dismissed, thinking there must be a mistake. But on March 24th, the vice principal called Mark's cell phone directly and told him Hannah had been marked absent for the 4th time that month. That afternoon, when Hannah came home, both parents were waiting at the kitchen table. Her laptop, her tablet, and her phone were lined up in a row between them. Sit down, Mark said. Hannah did. We know you've been skipping, Denise said. Her voice was tired. She'd worked a double shift the night before and her eyes were bloodshot. We need to know why. I just needed space, Hannah said calmly. Space from what? Her mother asked. Hannah looked at them both for a long moment. From you. The conversation went in circles for 20 minutes. Hannah didn't yell, didn't cry. She just sat there, answering their questions in the same flat, controlled tone, until finally Mark said, You're grounded. 2 weeks. No phone. No laptop except for homework, supervised. No going out except for school. Hannah looked at them both. Fine, she said. Then she stood and walked to her room without another word. It was the calmness that unnerved them. Most teenagers would have argued, slammed a door, accused them of being unfair. Hannah just accepted it, too easily. That night, Denise called her sister. She took it too well, she said. She didn't even argue. Mark thinks maybe she's finally maturing, accepting consequences, but I don't know. Something feels off. It would be the last conversation Denise would have with her sister. 4 days later, she'd be dead. What Denise and Mark didn't know was that Hannah had already adapted. That night, after midnight, she opened her school-issued Chromebook. Her parents had forgotten it wasn't linked to the same parental controls as her personal devices. She opened an incognito browser window, The clock in the corner read 12:14 a.m. on March 25th. By 12:21, her search history had begun. Texas juvenile death penalty laws. Can a 17-year-old get death sentence? Bat injuries versus knife injuries lethality. How long does it take to die from blunt force trauma? How to delete Ring doorbell footage. How to fake a home invasion. There were no misspellings, no panicked scrolling. Each search was methodical, precise, clinical. She took notes. At 12:46 a.m., she messaged a classmate she barely knew, a boy named Trevor, who sat 2 rows behind her in history class. They think they can own me, she wrote. It's funny, they actually think this is about school, Trevor responded with confusion, asking what she meant. Hannah replied, Don't worry about it. Just know I'll be free soon. No more rules. No more anyone telling me what to do. Trevor thought she meant she was planning to run away. He didn't think enough of it to tell anyone. At 1:13 a.m., Hannah went to the coat closet in the hallway and retrieved her father's old aluminum baseball bat, the one from his college days that he'd kept as a memento but never used. She carried it back to her room and slid it under her bed. Then she went to sleep. Over the next 3 weeks, her search history continued. She looked up information about juvenile sentencing, about how long murder trials took, about inheritance laws and whether minors could access their parents' bank accounts. She researched security systems, specifically the Ring setup her father had installed. She learned about cloud storage, about how footage uploaded automatically, about how to disable recording devices. But she missed one crucial detail. She thought destroying the physical recording unit would erase the footage. She didn't realize the system backed up to the cloud every 60 seconds. That single technological oversight would cost her everything. The day it happened was unremarkable. April 16th, a Tuesday. Warm, quiet spring sun cutting through the blinds. Hannah came home from school at her normal time. Her parents were both home. Denise had the day off. Mark was working in his home office. Dinner was at 6:30, like always. Chicken, rice, vegetables. Hannah barely touched her plate. When her father asked if she was feeling okay, she said she was fine, just tired. How's school? Denise asked. Fine, Hannah said. Any progress on that project for English? Mark asked. Yeah, Hannah said. Almost done. Normal conversation. Unremarkable. After dinner, Hannah helped clear the table, said goodnight, and went to her room. At 9:52 p.m., the hallway security camera captured her walking to the bathroom. She glanced directly at the camera lens, didn't smile, didn't flinch, just looked at it like she was acknowledging its presence. At 10:15 p.m., her parents went to bed. Mark had an early meeting the next morning. Denise was working a shift starting at 7 a.m. They said goodnight to Hannah through her bedroom door. She said goodnight back. At 11:43 p.m., the security footage showed Hannah's bedroom light turning off. At 11:47 p.m., the light in the hallway illuminated again. Hannah emerged from her room wearing pajamas, barefoot, carrying the bat. She moved slowly, deliberately, with no hesitation. She walked past the thermostat, past the bathroom, straight to her parents' bedroom door at the end of the hall. The camera captured her stopping outside their door. She stood there for approximately 8 seconds, the bat hanging at her side. Then she reached forward and knocked. What happened next was captured on audio only. The camera didn't have a view inside the bedroom, but the microphone picked up everything. The knock, a pause, then Denise's voice, groggy, confused. Hannah, what's wrong, honey? A thud, immediately followed by a scream. Mark's voice, suddenly alert, panicked. Hannah, what are you doing? Stop, Jesus Christ, stop! More thuds, the sound of wood hitting flesh and bone, again and again. Denise screaming, pleading, Hannah, please stop. We love you. We're sorry. Whatever we did, we're sorry. More impacts. Faster now. The sounds of struggle. Something crashing. The screaming continuing, becoming weaker, more desperate, then finally cutting off. Mark's voice, weakening. Why? Why are you... Another impact. Silence. More impacts. Then nothing but the sound of breathing and one final metallic clatter as the bat was dropped. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long it took. The bedroom camera's timestamp marked the duration from 11:47:14 p.m. to 11:51:51 p.m. then silence. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then that sound, that giggle, quiet, breathy, satisfied. The medical examiner would later testify that Mark sustained 23 separate impacts to his head, face, and upper body. Denise sustained 19. Both died from massive cranial trauma and brain hemorrhaging. The attack was so sustained and brutal that the bedroom walls were splattered with blood, and both victims' faces were rendered unrecognizable. After it was over, the hallway camera captured Hannah walking calmly out of the bedroom, the bat hanging at her side, blood visible on her pajamas and hands. She walked to the bathroom. The camera audio picked up water running. She was washing. After 3 minutes, she emerged wearing a different set of pajamas, carrying the bloody clothes in a plastic bag. She walked to the kitchen. The kitchen security camera, positioned above the sink, captured what happened next. Hannah opened the refrigerator, got a bottle of water, and sat down at the kitchen table. She drank slowly, methodically. She pulled out her school Chromebook and opened it. For the next 27 minutes, she sat there, scrolling, occasionally typing. At one point, she smiled slightly at something on the screen. Later forensic analysis of her browsing history during those 27 minutes showed she had messaged the same classmate, Trevor. "Problem solved," she wrote. "Parents won't be an issue anymore. Want to hang out this weekend?" Trevor, who was asleep and wouldn't see the message until morning, didn't respond. Hannah sent one more message at 12:14 a.m. "Don't worry about it. Just know I'm free now. No more rules, no more groundings, no more anyone telling me what to do." She actually took a selfie at 12:18 a.m. in her bedroom, slight smile, giving a thumbs up. Her parents' bodies were still in the room 20 feet away. The photo was recovered from her computer and would later be entered into evidence. Several jurors looked physically ill when they saw it. At 12:22 a.m., Hannah began staging the crime scene. She went to the laundry room and broke the window from the inside, using a rock from the backyard. She scattered glass to make it look like forced entry, though she scattered it wrong, most of the glass falling inside rather than outside. She went through her parents' bedroom and opened jewelry boxes, took a few valuable items, and hid them in the backyard to make it look like robbery. She found the main security system recording unit in her father's office and destroyed it with a hammer, not realizing the cloud backup had already preserved everything. At 12:47 a.m., satisfied with her staging, she went back to her bedroom. She took off the clean pajamas she'd changed into and put on a third set, this one with intentional tears and small smudges she created by rubbing dirt on them to look like she'd been in a struggle. Then she waited until 5:12 a.m. before calling 911. The 911 call was played at trial in its entirety. Hannah's voice on the recording was frantic, breathless, panicked. "Please, please, you have to help me. Someone broke into our house. I think they killed my parents. Please, you have to send someone." The dispatcher, a woman named Carol Henderson with 15 years of experience, asked Hannah to calm down and tell her what happened. "I heard screaming," Hannah said between sobs. "I was asleep and I heard screaming and crashing, and when I came out of my room, I saw someone running down the stairs. I went to check on my parents, and oh God, they're dead. There's blood everywhere. Please hurry." The dispatcher tried to keep Hannah calm, asked her if she was safe if the intruder was still in the house. "I don't know," Hannah cried. "I'm hiding in my room. What if they come back? What if they try to kill me too?" Officers were already being dispatched. "They'll be there in less than 3 minutes," the dispatcher said. "Stay on the line with me." When officers arrived at 5:19 a.m., they found Hannah on the front porch. She was wearing torn, dirt-smudged pajamas, no visible blood on her because she'd changed multiple times. She was crying, shaking, the picture of a traumatized teenager who just lost everything. Sergeant Avery Lynn, a 15-year veteran of the Denton Police Department, was the first on scene. "She looked like exactly what you'd expect," he later testified. "A scared kid who just witnessed something horrible. She was crying, shaking, kept saying she couldn't believe this was happening." Officers entered the house. The broken window, the disturbed jewelry boxes, the ransacked appearance. At first, it looked like a straightforward home invasion gone wrong. Then they found Mark and Denise Cole in their bedroom, and the scene was horrific. Blood splattered across the walls and ceiling. Both victims' heads severely damaged. a baseball bat leaning against the wall, partially wiped, but still with visible blood and hair. The violence was extreme, personal, sustained. This wasn't a quick robbery, one detective noted. Someone really wanted them dead. Hannah was brought to the kitchen for initial questioning. She was still crying, still shaking. She repeated her story. She'd been asleep. She heard screaming and crashing. She came out of her room and saw someone running away. She found her parents dead. She was terrified the killer would come back. Officers asked about the security system. My dad had cameras, Hannah said, but I don't know if they were recording. He just installed them a few months ago. That's when Detective Ramos, a younger officer who was more tech-savvy than most of his colleagues, asked if he could check. Hannah's face flickered, just for a second. Then she said, Sure, I guess. I don't think they'll show anything, though. Ramos found Mark's tablet in the office. The security app was still logged in. He started reviewing footage. When he got to the 11:47 p.m. timestamp, he froze, just stood there, staring at the screen. Then he stepped outside, called for the sergeant, and requested they secure a warrant immediately. When they came back inside with gloves and evidence bags and formal documentation, Hannah was making tea. It helps me calm down, she explained to Sergeant Lynn, who found her in the kitchen with the kettle on. My mom always made me tea when I was upset. They asked her to come down to the station for further questioning. She didn't resist, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't seem concerned. It wasn't until they were back in the house formally processing it as a crime scene, rather than interviewing a witness, that Hannah said the words that changed everything. One of the officers mentioned they'd recovered the security footage. Hannah, who'd been sitting calmly at the kitchen table, looked up sharply. That's not possible, she said. Her voice had changed. No more tears, no more shaking, just flat, cold. I destroyed the recorder. The footage should be gone. Sergeant Lynn stopped what he was doing. It uploads to the cloud automatically, he said, watching Hannah's face carefully. Every 60 seconds. We have everything. Hannah's expression went through a transformation that Lynn would describe multiple times in testimony. Her face went from the grief-stricken victim to shock to anger in about 3 seconds, he said. And then to nothing, just blank. Like a switch. She didn't cry, didn't try to explain, just looked at me with these empty eyes and said, Fuck, I should have researched that better. That was when they arrested her. Sergeant Lynn read her rights, while Officer Ramos called for child services since Hannah was still a minor. But Hannah wasn't crying anymore, wasn't playing the victim. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she said calmly, They shouldn't have taken my phone. It was the first time anyone heard her admit motive, the first glimpse of what had actually happened. They transported her to the station for formal questioning. Detective Kendra Sloan, a veteran homicide investigator with 23 years on the force, led the interrogation. The interrogation was recorded, and portions of it were played at trial. Sloan and her partner, Officer Marquez, let Hannah sit alone in the interrogation room for 13 minutes before entering. The camera captured Hannah during that time. She didn't cry, didn't put her head in her hands. She just sat there staring at the camera in the corner of the room like she was studying it, analyzing it. When Sloan and Marquez finally entered, they started with the basics. Hannah, do you know why you're here? Sloan asked, her voice calm, almost gentle. Hannah looked at her for a long moment. Because I'm not allowed to be angry, she said. The detectives exchanged a glance. What do you mean by that? Hannah shrugged. Nothing, never mind. They asked her about the night, about what she was doing before she went to bed, about the Chromebook she'd been using. Hannah said she'd been doing homework. What kind of homework? Marquez asked. English essay, Hannah said. They asked if they could see the essay. Hannah said sure, but when they forensically examined the Chromebook later, there was no English essay. What they found instead was the search history. Texas juvenile death penalty laws. How to delete ring footage. How to fake a break-in. They asked Hannah about it. She said nothing. Then Marquez started reading the text messages out loud. The ones to Trevor. They think they can own me. I'll be free soon. Problem solved. Parents won't be an issue anymore. Hannah's expression never changed. Did you mean that, Hannah? Sloan asked quietly. Hannah looked directly at her. I meant every word. The detectives asked her if she understood what would happen now. Hannah said she did. You're 17 years old, Sloan said carefully, but the district attorney is going to be requesting capital murder charges. Do you understand what that means? Hannah nodded. It means death penalty, she said flatly. I researched it. Sloan leaned forward. Hannah, your parents are dead. You're sitting here telling us you researched the death penalty. Help us understand what happened. Hannah was quiet for almost a full minute. Then she said, I already did what I came to do. That's all that matters. The interrogation continued for another hour, but Hannah didn't say much else. She invoked her right to remain silent partway through and refused to answer any more questions. But the damage was done. Her words, her attitude, her complete lack of remorse, it was all on video, all documented, all admissible in court. That afternoon, District Attorney Meredith Grant held a press conference outside the courthouse. Grant was a formidable prosecutor, 52 years old, with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. She stood at a podium with microphones from every local news station pointed at her. The Denton County District Attorney's Office has reviewed the evidence in the murders of Mark and Denise Cole, she said, her voice steady and clear. Given the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, the brutality of the crime, and the defendant's complete absence of remorse, our office is pursuing capital murder charges against Hannah Cole, who will be charged as an adult. A reporter immediately asked the question everyone was thinking. But she's only 17. She's still a teenager. Is the death penalty really appropriate? Grant looked directly at the camera. Hannah Cole methodically planned and executed the murder of both her parents. She researched how to do it. She researched how to cover it up. She staged a crime scene. She called 911 and performed a convincing act of being a victim. And when confronted with evidence, she showed no remorse whatsoever. Age is a factor we consider, but it does not negate the brutality of what was done or the danger this individual poses. Under Texas law, a 17-year-old can be charged with capital murder. This is one of those rare and tragic cases where the law allows for that charge, and we believe it's appropriate. The press conference sparked immediate national debate. Civil rights organizations condemned the decision. Defense attorneys across the state called it prosecutorial overreach. Child development experts argued that 17-year-olds couldn't be held to the same standard as adults because their brains weren't fully developed. But victims' rights groups and law enforcement associations supported the DA's decision, pointing to the premeditation and brutality of the crime. The debate would rage for months, all the way through the trial and beyond. But legally, the decision stood. Hannah Cole, 17 years old, would be tried as an adult for capital murder. Her preliminary hearing was brief. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Carver, who'd been on the bench for 24 years, reviewed the charges. She asked Hannah if she understood them. Hannah nodded. Yes, Your Honor, she said calmly. The judge asked if she had legal representation. Marcus Ellis, the public defender assigned to her case, stood and confirmed he was representing her. The judge set bail at $5 million, effectively ensuring Hannah would remain in custody. Hannah showed no reaction. As she was being led out of the courtroom, a reporter called out, Hannah, do you have anything to say? Hannah stopped, turned, and looked directly at the cameras. Can I keep my books in my cell? She asked. Then she was gone. The comment went viral within hours. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people were horrified by her apparent callousness. Others argued it was proof she was mentally disturbed and needed help, not punishment. But to the investigators and prosecutors who had seen the footage, read her searches, and heard her interrogation, it was just another example of who Hannah really was. Not a traumatized teenager, not a victim of circumstance, just cold, calculating, and completely unremorseful. The trial began 6 months later, on October 3rd. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with media from across the country. Court TV broadcast it live. The New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all sent reporters. Outside the Harris County Courthouse, protesters gathered. Some held signs demanding justice for Mark and Denise. Others held signs protesting the prosecution of a juvenile. The debate had become a national referendum on juvenile justice, brain development, and the death penalty itself. Inside the courtroom, prosecutor Alina Brandt stood before the jury during opening statements. Brandt was known for her methodical approach, her ability to lay out evidence piece by piece until the picture became undeniable. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, over the next several days, you are going to see and hear evidence that will disturb you. You are going to watch security footage of a 17-year-old girl walking down a hallway carrying a baseball bat. You are going to hear what happened when she entered her parents' bedroom. You are going to see her text messages, her Google searches, her careful planning, and you are going to see what she did after, how she made tea, how she sent messages to friends, how she staged a crime scene and called 911 with a performance worthy of an Oscar. Brandt walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. The defense is going to tell you that Hannah Cole is a child, that her brain isn't fully developed, that she couldn't fully understand the consequences of her actions. But the evidence will show you something different. It will show you a teenager who spent hours researching how to commit murder, who Googled whether 17-year-olds can get the death penalty, who methodically planned every step, executed those plans with cold precision, and then showed absolutely no remorse when caught. That's not a child acting on impulse. That's premeditated murder. When it was Marcus Ellis's turn, the defense attorney stood slowly. Ellis had been a public defender for 32 years. He'd handled difficult cases before, but nothing like this. Hannah Cole is 17 years old, he began, his voice softer than Brandt's, but no less serious. She is a child. Yes, she's a senior in high school. Yes, she's intelligent. But she is not an adult. Her brain is still developing, particularly the parts responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and understanding consequences. The prosecution wants you to see her as a cold-blooded killer. But the evidence will show you a mentally disturbed young woman who was under extreme psychological pressure and whose actions, while horrific, were not the result of evil, but of illness. Ellis talked about Hannah's isolation, her difficulty connecting with peers, her obsessive need for control that suggested underlying mental illness. The prosecution will show you searches and texts that seem to indicate planning, but I ask you to consider whether those searches might also indicate a teenager in crisis, spiraling into a dark place, desperately trying to understand what was happening in her own mind. Hannah Cole needs help. She needs treatment. What she does not need is to be executed for crimes committed when her brain was still that of a child. The jury, 7 women and 5 men ranging from their 20s to their 60s, listened intently to both sides. But as the trial progressed and the evidence was presented, it became clear that the defense had an almost impossible task. The security footage was shown on the second day of trial. The prosecution had warned everyone in the courtroom about the graphic nature of what they were about to see. Judge Carver had asked if anyone wanted to leave before the video played. A handful of spectators exited. Most stayed. They would regret it. When the audio played, when they heard Denise Cole begging her daughter to stop, when they heard her last words, "Hannah, please, we love you," several people in the gallery broke down completely. The jurors sat in horrified silence, and Hannah sat at the defense table, showing no emotion whatsoever, occasionally glancing at the screen as if she were watching a documentary about a stranger rather than video of herself murdering her parents. The Google searches were presented next. Brandt read each one aloud slowly, letting them sink in. Texas juvenile death penalty laws. Can a 17-year-old get death sentence? Bad injuries versus knife injuries lethality. How long does it take to die from blunt force trauma? How to delete Ring doorbell footage? How to fake a home invasion? Each one time-stamped, each one methodical, each one showing clear premeditation. Then came the text messages, the ones to Trevor. They think they can own me. Problem solved. Parents won't be an issue anymore. And finally, the selfie. Hannah in her bedroom, slight smile, thumbs up, taken less than an hour after she'd beaten her parents to death. When that photo appeared on the screen, you could hear the collective sharp intake of breath from the gallery. One juror put her hand over her mouth. Another looked away entirely. The prosecution called witness after witness. Julia Mason, the classmate, testified about Hannah's disturbing comments. She said people should pay for what they do to you, Julia repeated on the stand. She said she wished she could control everything. At the time, I thought she was just being edgy, like teenagers trying to sound deep. But now, Mr. Morton, the English teacher, testified about Hannah's essay comparing justice to control. She wrote that punishment should make people understand their place, he said, his voice heavy with regret. She wrote that sometimes the only way to break free from control is to eliminate the source of that control. I thought it was metaphorical. I was wrong. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Wong, provided clinical testimony about the victim's injuries. Mark Cole sustained 23 separate impacts, she testified. Denise Cole sustained 19. Both victims died from massive cranial trauma. The force required for these injuries was substantial. This was not a single impulsive act. This was sustained, repeated violence over several minutes. Both victims would have been conscious for at least part of the attack. They would have known what was happening to them. The jury looked sick. Sergeant Lynn testified about finding Hannah making tea. She said it helped her calm down, he recalled. She was sitting at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. When we found the footage and confronted her, she didn't cry or deny it. She just said, "I should have researched that better." Not, "I didn't do it." Not, "This is a mistake." She was upset that she got caught. Not that her parents were dead. Detective Sloan testified about the interrogation. The video was played for the jury. They heard Hannah say, "I'm not allowed to be angry." They heard her admit, "I meant every word." They heard her say, "I already did what I came to do." The impact was devastating. This wasn't a teenager who'd snapped in a moment of rage. This was someone who'd planned, executed, and felt satisfied with what she'd done. The defense tried to counter with their own experts. Dr. Megan Sellers, a child development psychologist, testified about adolescent brain development. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and decision-making, doesn't fully mature until the mid-20s, she explained. 17-year-olds are physiologically incapable of fully understanding long-term consequences the way adults do. Ellis pressed this point. "Doctor, can a 17-year-old under psychological stress make decisions that seem calculated but are actually the result of a developing brain's inability to properly process emotion and consequence?" Dr. Sellers nodded. "Absolutely. Adolescents, particularly those dealing with feelings of powerlessness or lack of control, can develop obsessive thought patterns that seem like planning, but are actually a form of psychological crisis. Hannah may have researched these things not because she was coldly planning murder, but because her brain was desperately trying to resolve an emotional conflict. It wasn't developed enough to handle appropriately." But on cross-examination, Prosecutor Brandt dismantled this argument piece by piece. "Dr. Sellers, does the typical 17-year-old who is experiencing a psychological crisis spend hours researching how to kill someone?" "Well, no, but does the typical 17-year-old in emotional distress Google whether they can get the death penalty for murder before committing murder?" "That's not typical, but does the typical 17-year-old take a selfie giving a thumbs up an hour after killing their parents?" Dr. Sellers hesitated. "No," she admitted quietly. "That would be extremely unusual even for someone in crisis." The prosecution's psychiatric expert, Dr. Michael Chen, was devastating. Chen was one of the country's leading forensic psychiatrists, with 30 years of experience evaluating violent offenders. He'd evaluated Hannah extensively, conducting multiple interviews, psychological tests, and assessments. "Dr. Chen," Brandt asked, "in your professional opinion, does Hannah Cole understand the difference between right and wrong?" "Yes," Dr. Chen said, without hesitation. "Absolutely. She understood it before the murders, during the murders, and after the murders. She knew killing her parents was wrong. She just didn't care." Dr. Chen explained his findings. "Hannah Cole exhibits what we call callous unemotional traits. This is a pattern of behavior characterized by lack of empathy, lack of remorse, shallow emotions, and manipulative behavior. In adolescence, these traits are extremely concerning because they're predictive of persistent antisocial behavior into adulthood." Brandt asked him to elaborate. "When I evaluated Hannah, I showed her the security footage of her walking down the hallway carrying the bat. I asked her what she saw. Her response was, I see a solution to a problem. Not, I see something terrible or I see the worst mistake of my life. She viewed her parents as a problem and herself as having solved that problem. He continued. I asked her if she felt any guilt about what she did. She said no. I asked if she understood why other people would think what she did was wrong. She said to me, oh, I guess they just don't get it. I asked her if she felt any sadness that her parents were dead. She said, well, why would I? They're not here to bother me anymore. This isn't the response of someone in crisis who made a terrible mistake. This is the response of someone with a fundamental inability to experience normal human emotions like empathy and remorse. Brandt asked the crucial question, Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, does Hannah Cole pose a continuing threat to society? Dr. Chen didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. Hannah is 17 years old and has already demonstrated she's willing to kill multiple people to get what she wants. Her complete lack of remorse, her lack of empathy, and her demonstrated capacity for planned violence make her extremely dangerous. If released into society, I have no doubt she would harm or kill again. She is, in my professional opinion, a psychopath who will never develop the capacity for normal human emotion. She will never be safe to be around other people. The defense tried to challenge this on cross-examination, pointing to brain development and the possibility of change. But Dr. Chen was firm. While it's true that brains continue developing into the mid-20s, psychopathic traits like those Hannah exhibits are remarkably resistant to change. Research shows that individuals with these traits don't develop empathy as they age. They may learn to better mimic normal emotions, to better manipulate others, but they don't fundamentally change. Hannah at 17 is showing fully developed psychopathic traits. She won't grow out of this. The jury also heard recordings of Hannah's jail phone calls. Inmates are told their calls are recorded, and Hannah knew this, but she didn't seem to care. In one call to a former classmate, she said, I don't get why everyone's making such a big deal about this. They were my parents. If anyone had the right to decide whether they lived or died, it was me. In another call, she complained about being caught rather than expressing any remorse for the murders. I should have just run away, she told another friend. Would have been easier than dealing with all this legal bullshit. By the time closing arguments came, the outcome felt inevitable. The defense had tried. Ellis had made impassioned pleas about Hannah's youth, about brain development, about the possibility of rehabilitation. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video showed what she did, the searches showed she planned it, the texts and selfies showed her attitude afterward, and the expert testimony confirmed she was a psychopath who would always be dangerous. When the jury filed out to deliberate, it took them only 11 hours over 2 days to reach a verdict. The courtroom was packed when they returned. Hannah sat at the defense table, hands folded, expression neutral. Judge Carver called the courtroom to order. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a man in his 50s named Robert Chen, no relation to the expert, stood. We have, Your Honor. He handed the paper to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Judge Carver read it silently, her face revealing nothing, then handed it back. Please read the verdict aloud. On the charge of capital murder in the death of Mark Cole, we, the jury, find the defendant, Hannah Cole, guilty. On the charge of capital murder in the death of Denise Cole, we, the jury, find the defendant, Hannah Cole, guilty. A woman in the gallery, Denise's sister, let out a sob. Hannah's expression didn't change at all. No surprise, no fear, nothing. Judge Carver thanked the jury and immediately moved to the penalty phase. The jury will now determine whether the defendant should be sentenced to death or life in prison without the possibility of parole, she said. The penalty phase took another 3 days. The prosecution argued that Hannah was irredeemable, that she would always be a danger, that the death penalty was the only appropriate sentence. She murdered her parents in cold blood, but Brandt said in her closing argument. She planned it. She executed it. She showed no mercy when they begged for their lives. Her own mother's last words were, "We love you," and Hannah killed her anyway. She has shown no remorse. She has shown no recognition that what she did was wrong. Every expert who has evaluated her says she will never be safe to release. This is exactly the kind of case that the death penalty was designed for. The defense begged for mercy. She's 17 years old, Ellis pleaded, his voice breaking. She's a child. Yes, she did something horrific. Yes, she needs to be punished. But executing a teenager, no matter how terrible the crime, is not justice. It's revenge. I'm asking you to sentence her to life in prison, to give her the rest of her life to come to terms with what she did, but not to kill her. But the jury had heard Dr. Chen's testimony. They'd seen Hannah's complete lack of remorse. They'd watched her sit through the entire trial with no emotion, no tears, no human response. And when they deliberated, it took them 12 hours before returning with their recommendation, death. Judge Carver took the jury's recommendation and scheduled a formal sentencing hearing for 1 week later. On that day, the courtroom was once again packed. Denise's sister was allowed to give a victim impact statement. She could barely speak through her tears. Hannah took my sister from me, she said. She took a good woman, a loving mother, a caring nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. She beat her to death with a bat while Denise begged for mercy. And for what? A cell phone. A 2-week grounding. That's all it took for Hannah to decide my sister didn't deserve to live. She looked directly at Hannah. I hope you rot in hell. Hannah stared back at her, expression blank. Judge Carver then addressed the court. This is one of the most difficult cases I've presided over in my 24 years on the bench, she said. The defendant is 17 years old. Under different circumstances, that youth might be a mitigating factor, but these are not different circumstances. Hannah Cole planned the murders of her parents. She carried out those murders with brutal efficiency. She showed no mercy when they begged for their lives. And in the months since their deaths, she has shown no remorse, no recognition of wrongdoing, no capacity for empathy or human feeling. Judge Carver looked down at Hannah. The evidence shows you are a danger to society. The experts agree you will always be a danger. The jury has recommended the death penalty, and I concur with that recommendation. It is therefore the judgment of this court that you, Hannah Cole, be sentenced to death by lethal injection to be carried out in accordance with Texas law. Someone gasped. Denise's sister sobbed. Hannah remained perfectly still. Do you have anything to say? The judge asked. There was a long pause. Then Hannah stood. This is bullshit, she said calmly. I'm 17. They're not actually going to execute a teenager. This is just for show. I'll appeal and some judge will reduce it eventually. You people are idiots if you think I'm actually going to die for this. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in this courtroom! When the room finally quieted, Judge Carver looked at Hannah with an expression of cold certainty. Ms. Cole, you are wrong. You committed these murders at age 17, which makes you eligible for the death penalty under Texas law. Your appeals will be heard and likely denied. And unless the law changes or a governor grants clemency, the state of Texas will execute you. You may think this is posturing, but I assure you it is not. Take her away. Bailiffs approached Hannah. For just a second, her confident expression flickered. Then it returned. She smiled slightly and walked out of the courtroom with her head high, apparently still convinced that no one would actually execute a teenager, no matter what the law said. She was wrong about that, just as she'd been wrong about the security footage. The appeals process began immediately. Ellis and his team filed every motion they could. They challenged the constitutionality of executing a juvenile offender. They argued the trial was unfair. They claimed inadequate counsel, though Ellis had done everything possible to defend her. They presented new brain development research, new studies about psychopathy in adolescents, new arguments about rehabilitation. Every single appeal was denied. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that executing a 17-year-old for capital murder was constitutional under existing precedent. The Fifth Circuit agreed. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case. Civil rights organizations protested. Anti-death penalty groups held vigils. Legal scholars wrote op-eds. But legally, the sentence was solid. Hannah had been 17 at the time of the murders, which was above the constitutional minimum age for execution. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury had found aggravating circumstances, and courts consistently found that she posed a permanent danger to society. Hannah was transferred to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, the state's death row for women. She was 18 by then. having spent her 18th birthday in county jail awaiting transfer. According to guards and prison officials, she adapted to prison life with disturbing ease. She was manipulative, trying to befriend guards to get special privileges. She was cold with other inmates, viewing them with contempt. And she never, not once in all the years she spent on death row, expressed any remorse for killing her parents. One prison psychologist who evaluated her after 5 years wrote, "Hannah Cole, at 23, is essentially the same person she was at 17. She shows no capacity for empathy, no remorse, no recognition that she did anything wrong. She views her parents' murders as justified because they disrespected her by enforcing rules. She expresses no grief about their deaths, only frustration that she was caught. She is, in my professional opinion, a textbook psychopath who will never be capable of genuine change." The years passed slowly. Hannah's case became a reference point in national debates about juvenile sentencing. Courts, citing her case, would say things like, as in Cole, where the defendant showed extreme premeditation and complete lack of remorse when justifying harsh sentences for young offenders. Other courts would go the opposite direction, saying, unlike Cole, where the defendant was a diagnosed psychopath, this defendant has shown genuine remorse and capacity for change. When giving more lenient sentences, she became the extreme case against which others were measured. Media attention intensified as her execution date approached. She would be 30 years old when executed, having spent 13 years on death row. She would be the youngest person executed in the United States in over 70 years. Protesters gathered outside the prison. News crews camped out for days. Hannah agreed to several interviews in the weeks before her execution, apparently hoping to generate sympathy or, at minimum, get attention. But the interviews had the opposite effect. In one interview with a CNN correspondent, she was asked if she felt any remorse for killing her parents. "Remorse for what?" she responded. "They disrespected me. They thought they could control me. I showed them they couldn't. That's not something to feel sorry about. That's standing up for yourself." The interviewer, visibly disturbed, pressed her. "Hannah, you beat your parents to death with a baseball bat. Your mother's last words were telling you she loved you. How can you say you don't regret that?" Hannah shrugged. "She said she loved me while trying to control every aspect of my life. That's not love. That's ownership. I freed myself. If she really loved me, she would have let me live my life." The interviewer tried again. "But you killed them over a cell phone, over being grounded." "I killed them because they thought they had the right to control me," Hannah corrected. "The phone was just the last straw. It was never really about the phone. It was about freedom. It was about not being treated like property." The interview aired 2 days before the execution and destroyed any remaining public sympathy. Even people who opposed the death penalty on principle found themselves unable to defend someone who showed such complete absence of humanity. On the day before her execution, Hannah received a final visit from her aunt, Denise's sister. The visit was recorded and later released to the media. The aunt could barely speak through her tears. "Hannah, I loved you," she said. "You were my niece. I watched you grow up. I can't believe what you did. I can't believe what you became. I'm so sorry about tomorrow. I wish things had been different." Hannah looked at her blankly. "Things would have been different if they'd just left me alone," she said. "If they hadn't been such control freaks. This is really their fault. If they'd just respected me, they'd still be alive." Her aunt stared at her in horror. "Hannah, you killed them. You beat them to death. How can you blame them?" "Because they made me do it," Hannah said calmly. "They pushed me to it. They didn't give me a choice." The aunt was sobbing now. "They loved you. They were just trying to be good parents." "If they loved me, they would have respected me," Hannah said. "They didn't. So here we are." The visit ended with the aunt leaving in tears and Hannah showing no emotion whatsoever. A guard, who was present, later said, after her aunt left crying, Hannah asked what was for dinner like nothing had happened. On the day of her execution, March 21st, Hannah was allowed to make a final statement. The execution chamber at the Huntsville unit was small, clinical, a gurney in the center with straps, a window where witnesses sat. Hannah was brought in at 6:15 p.m. and strapped down. The witnesses included the warden, a chaplain, representatives from the DA's office, and Denise's sister, who had requested to be present. Media witnesses were also allowed. Hannah looked at the ceiling as they strapped her arms and legs. When asked if she had any final words, she was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "I want to start by saying I don't regret what I did," Hannah said, her voice calm and clear. "My parents thought they owned me. They thought they could control every aspect of my life. They were wrong. What I did was stand up for myself. In a better world, children wouldn't be treated as property." She paused. "People say I should feel sorry for killing them, but I don't. They made choices that led to their deaths. They chose to disrespect me. They chose to treat me like I didn't matter. Those choices had consequences. I was just the one who enforced those consequences." She took a breath. "I'm 30 years old. I've spent almost half my life on death row for having the courage to stand up to people who thought they could control me. People watching this should learn from my example. Don't let anyone control you. Don't let anyone disrespect you." Her final words were, "I don't ask for forgiveness because I did nothing wrong. I don't feel sorry because there's nothing to be sorry for. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't. The only thing I regret is getting caught." The warden signaled. The chemicals began flowing through the IV. Hannah stared at the ceiling, still showing no fear, no remorse, nothing but the same cold detachment she'd shown throughout trial and her years on death row. At 6:23 p.m. on March 21st, Hannah Cole was pronounced dead, becoming the youngest person executed in the United States in over 7 decades. Her final words, expressing no remorse and stating she would murder her parents again if given the chance, confirmed for many people that the death sentence had been appropriate, however tragic the entire situation was. The execution reignited debates that had been ongoing since her trial. Some argued that no one should be executed for crimes committed before age 18, that brain development science showed 17-year-olds weren't fully responsible for their actions, that execution was simply state-sanctioned revenge. Others pointed to Hannah's case as proof that some offenders, regardless of age, were simply too dangerous to ever be released and showed no capacity for rehabilitation. Legal scholars and ethicists would debate her case for years. Hannah's body was cremated. Her ashes were given to her aunt, who buried them in an unmarked grave far from where Mark and Denise Cole were buried. She released a brief statement. "I loved Hannah because she was my niece, but I recognize that she murdered 2 good people for no real reason. I pray for my sister and brother-in-law. I cannot pray for Hannah because I don't believe she had a soul." In the weeks and months that followed, the story didn't fade. Outside the courthouse where it had all begun, candles burned each year on April 16th, the anniversary of the murders. Denise's sister and the few remaining family members gathered quietly each year to remember Mark and Denise Cole, good people, caring people, parents who had tried their best and paid for it with their lives. When reporters asked Denise's sister if she'd forgiven Hannah, she looked away. "Forgiveness is for people who understand what they did wrong," she said. Hannah never understood. She never felt sorry. She went to her death believing she was right. You can't forgive someone like that. The case became required reading in law schools discussing juvenile sentencing. It was studied in psychology courses about psychopathy and whether it can be identified in adolescence. It was debated in ethics classes about punishment and rehabilitation. Hannah Cole became a name that would live on long after her death, not because of what she achieved, but because of what she destroyed. 2 lives taken for the most trivial of reasons, a family destroyed, and a teenager who spent 13 years on death row and died at 30 without ever once feeling sorry for what she'd done. In the end, what made Hannah Cole's case so disturbing wasn't just the brutality of the crime or the youth of the offender. It was the complete absence of humanity she displayed from beginning to end. No remorse, no growth, no change over 13 years, just cold, calculated certainty that she had been right to do what she did and that everyone else was wrong to punish her for it. And that, more than anything, was why her name would be remembered, not as a cautionary tale about teenage rebellion, not as a tragic story of mental illness, but as a stark reminder that sometimes Rarely, but undeniably, people exist who simply lack the fundamental capacity for empathy, remorse, and human connection that makes us human. Mark and Denise Cole were buried side by side in a cemetery in Denton, Texas. Their graves bore a simple inscription: together in life, together in eternity, beloved and missed. Every year, on the anniversary of their deaths, Denise's sister visited those graves. She would sit there, thinking about her sister, about the relationship they'd had, about the life Denise should have had, and she would think about Hannah too, about the baby Denise had brought home from the hospital 30 years ago, about the toddler who had seemed normal, about the question that haunted everyone who knew the case. When had that baby become a monster? At what point had something gone wrong? Was it from birth? Was Hannah born without the capacity for empathy? Or had something happened in her childhood that broke whatever mechanism allows humans to feel for others? The psychologist couldn't say for certain. Dr. Chen believed it was likely neurological, that Hannah's brain had probably always been different in ways that made empathy impossible. Dr. Sellers believed it might have been environmental, that growing up in a home where love felt conditional had warped Hannah's development. But ultimately, no one knew. And Hannah herself had never cared to explore the question. She'd simply been what she was, done what she did, and gone to her death believing she'd been right. The story of Hannah Cole was one without redemption. No last-minute realization of wrongdoing. No tearful apology. No moment of human connection. Just a teenager who murdered her parents over a phone, spent 13 years on death row showing no remorse, and died at 30, still insisting she'd done nothing wrong. It was a story that challenged comfortable assumptions about childhood, about rehabilitation, about human nature itself. It was a story that asked difficult questions about justice, punishment, and whether some people truly are beyond saving. And it was a story that ended not with closure, but with silence. The silence of two graves, the silence of a prison execution chamber, the silence of a question that would never be answered. What made Hannah Cole who she was? What do you think? Should a 17-year-old ever face the death penalty for a crime like this? Or do you believe some people are simply born without remorse? Tell us in the comments below and let us know where you're watching from. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new story. And if this one made you think, share it so others can too. We'll see you tomorrow with another story that reminds us how fragile justice and humanity can be. This story is unverified and may or may not be true. It is presented for entertainment purposes only.